大家新年好！感谢去年观众和会员对我们频道的大力支持。今天咱们聊聊一个劲爆的话题：中美在 AI 领域的差距有多大？大模型和芯片要取代美国吗？英伟达、AMD、台积电、Facebook、Google 等巨头有危机了。起因就是上周 AI 圈都在聊 DeepSeek， 说是用很少算力就干倒了老满的水平。今天联合早报还出了一篇深度报告来报道此事。联合早报提到，原本需要投入上亿美元才能训练好的大语言模型，被中国一家初创公司给硬生生的压制数百万美元就能训练出来。这家来自杭州的初创公司深度求索 DeepSeek 12月26日在微信公众号上宣布全新的开源大模型 DeepSeek V3， 并大方公布53页的技术论文，披露该模型的所有训练细节及评测结果。评测显示，上述模型在考察百科知识、代码、数学能力等评测集中得分超过阿里云 Qwen 2.572B 和 Meta 的 Llama 3.1405B 这两大开源模型，甚至与世界顶尖的闭源模型 GPT-4o 及 Claude 3.5 Sonnet 不分伯仲。我们先看下美国的媒体如何报道此事。
All right, now it is time for Tech Check, and today let's talk about AI, but not in the way that you all think, because there is a new model that has all of the valley buzzing, and it does not come from OpenAI or Meta or Google or any of those names. Deirdre Bosa, this comes from a rather unusual source.
It also comes from China, Brian. It's called DeepSeek. And here's why it matters. It took Google and OpenAI years and billions of dollars to build the latest AI large language models. But now, a Chinese research lab has built a competitive model in just 2 months with dumbed down GPUs for less than, get this, $6 million. Not billion, $6 million. Now, DeepSeek looks and acts just like ChatGPT. I've been trying it out this morning, and when I asked, what model are you? It answered, I'm an AI language model created by OpenAI, specifically based on the GPT-4 architecture, suggesting that it was trained on ChatGPT outputs, which, leaving aside terms of service violations, means that entirely new state-of-the-art models, they can be built on what is already out there. In other words, OpenAI's moat may be shrinking. If a model like DeepSeek can emerge with competitive performance, minimal cost, and reliance on existing outputs, it signals a rapidly shrinking barrier to entry in AI development, challenging the current dominance of industry leaders like OpenAI and Google and Anthropic and Meta, by the way. There's also key geopolitical implications in this for the AI race. DeepSeek is backed by a Chinese quant trading firm, High Flyer Capital Management, and it used NVIDIA H800s, a lower performance version of the H100 chips that are cheaper, more available, and tailored for restricted markets like China. So they were able to sort of go around the H100s that everyone seems to be looking for here in the West. Now, in fact, it cost DeepSeek just $5.5 million to train it versus hundreds of millions of dollars for Meta's latest Llama model and billions of dollars for GPT and Gemini models. This all raises an important question, Brian, for investors as the AI trade evolves and technological progress stalls. Is training frontier models still a good investment? DeepSeek should make investors look twice.
Why the difference in price? Like, what am I getting for $5.5 million versus $1 billion?
That's the thing. You're basically getting a model that's as good as the frontier models that OpenAI and Llama have created. So there's third parties that check key benchmarks. These are key capabilities of the different large language models. And they found that the ones from DeepSeek, which was presumably built and trained on public OpenAI ChatGPT data, is as good or better in some cases than Meta's or OpenAI. So it's really remarkable. You get just as much bang for your buck for a lot less, like $5.5 million versus billions and billions of dollars that OpenAI has shelled out. So this is really a remarkable development that has huge implications for the race. I spoke to one source who questioned some of the benchmarks, but nonetheless said this is a massive development and, could make investors question, do you need the high-end GPUs if you can get just as much out of the H800s, the dumbed-down version?
If that's the case, it changes a lot of the game, including for energy. But This is one thing. To your point, Deirdre, we'll see where it all goes. DeepSeek, we're watching you. And you, Deirdre Bosa. Thank you very much.
DeepSeek 的出现，基本上的定调，很大程度上标志着美国对中国的 AI 封锁战略不算成功。众所周知，美国在技术研究上一直是老大，比如深度学习的核心算法、Transformer 架构、GPT 模型，这些基本都是从美国的大学和实验室搞出来的。像斯坦福、MIT 这些学校的研究，简直就是教科书级。但中国这几年在这块追得特别猛，顶级论文数量一直在涨。而 DeepSeek V3 引起了 AO 圈的热议，这个模型声称仅用1/10的算力就达到了 Llama 的效果，引发了对 Scaling Law 扩展法则和算力基建必要性的讨论。然而，墙内的朋友别高兴太早啊，这是其实就像仿制药，从实际分析来看，这种看似低成本突破并不能真正颠覆行业规则。在创新药界也有一个双10定律，即一款 first in class 的创新药需要花10年和10亿美金才能做出来，但是同款的仿制药无论是时间还是开销是远远低于这个数字的。所以你不能说我只用了1000万美金做出来了一款哪怕是 me better 的药，就 claim 自己颠覆了创新药的研发范式，别人只会觉得这是个追随者。是的， DeepSeek 也同理。其实 99% 的算力是浪费在了无效路径和探索上，但是没有那 99% 就没有那 1%， 只是站在巨人的肩膀上优化了一下，离真正颠覆还远着呢。或者说，只要领域足够细分，总能拿到某个冠军。简单来说，创新往往需要大量的试错和探索，没有前期的高成本投入，也不可能有后来低成本的复制和优化。Dense 模型如 GPT-4 和 Llama 通过算力和数据的堆砌解决通用泛化问题，而 MO 专家混合模型则更擅长在专业领域发挥作用。但无论是哪种模型，业界对 scaling 的质疑始终存在，尤其是在算力、数据与实际产出性价比上的瓶颈愈发明显。其实，中国大模型震惊美国的新闻不是第一次了。在上个月，其实还有一个新闻是关于今天 DeepSeek 在中国的竞争对手阿里 Qwen 的。当时媒体也是说，阿里的通义 Qwen 让美国那边都惊了。连谷歌前 CEO Eric Schmidt 的采访视频，他说阿里的这个模型性能已经接近 Meta 日常使用的 Llama 300亿参数模型，有些指标甚至还超越了 Llama， 代表着世界顶级的商用大模型水平。他原本觉得中国的大模型水平要落后美国2到3年，但现在他说差距已经缩小到1年以内了，这追赶速度连他都震惊。更猛的是，他提到除了美国和中国，其他国家的大模型几乎都落后了，基本看不到啥竞争力。听到这儿，你就知道中国在这块进步有多快了吧？也不难理解为什么美国要不遗余力地封锁中国搞事情，最近还打算推出一个曼哈顿计划，来全方位的在 AI 领域跟中国 PK。 我们来看采访部分原文，我做了中文字幕，方便大家理解。
So there are quite a few people in the industry, along with myself, who are working on this. And the general idea is relatively light regulation, looking for the extreme cases. So the extreme events would be a biological attack, a cyber attack, something that harmed a lot of people, as opposed to a single individual, which is always a tragedy. Any misuse of these in war, any of those kinds of things we worry a lot about. And there's a lot of questions here. One of them is, do you think that if we had an AGI system that developed a way to kill all of the soldiers from the opposition in one day, that it would be used? And I think the answer from a military general perspective would be yes. The next question is, do you think that the North Koreans, for example, or the Chinese would obey the same rules about when to apply that? And the answer is no one believes that they would do it safely and carefully under the way the U.S. law would require. U.S. law has a law called person in the loop, or meaningful human control, that tries to keep these things from going out of hand. So what I actually think is that we don't have a theory of deterrence with these new tools. We don't know how to deal with the spread of them. And the simple example And sorry for the diversion for a sec, but there's closed source and open source. Closed is like you can use it, but the software and the numbers are not available. There are other systems called open source where everything is published. China now has two of what appear to be the most powerful models ever made, and they're completely open. And we're obviously, you and I are not in China, and I don't know why China made a decision to release them, but surely evil groups and so forth will start to use those. Now, maybe they don't speak Chinese or what have you, or maybe the Chinese just discount the risk. But there's a real risk of proliferation of systems in the hands of terrorism. And the proliferation is not going to occur by misusing Microsoft or Google or what have you. It's going to be by making their own servers in the dark web. And an example, a worry that we all have is exfiltration of the models. I'll give you an example. Google or Microsoft or OpenAI spends $200 million or something to build one of these models. They're very powerful. And then some evil actor manages to exfiltrate it out of those companies and put it on the dark web. We have no theory of what to do when that occurs because we don't control the dark web. We don't know how to detect it and so forth. In the book, we talk about this and say that eventually the network systems globally will have fairly sophisticated supervision systems that will watch for this because it's another example of proliferation. It's analogous to the spread of enriched uranium. If anyone tried to do that, there's an awful lot of monitoring systems that would say, you have to stop right now or we're going to shoot you.
So you make a really cogent argument for the kind of existential threat here, the weaponization of AI by bad actors. And we have faced similar issues before. My understanding is there are multilateral treaties around bioweapons, or we have nuclear arms treaties. So is this the point in time where people such as yourself and our defense infrastructure should be thinking about or trying to figure out multilateral agreements? And again, the hard part there is my understanding is it's very hard to monitor things like this. And should we have something along the lines of Interpol that's basically policing this and then fighting fire with fire, using AI to go out and find scenarios where things look very ugly and move in with some sort of international force? It feels like a time for some sort of multinational cooperation is upon us. Your thoughts?
We agree with you, and in the book, we specifically talk about this in a historical context of the nuclear weapons regime, which Dr. Kissinger, as you know, invented largely. What's interesting is working with him, you realize how long it took for the full solution to occur. America used the bomb in 1945. Russia or Soviet Union demonstrated it in 1949. So that's roughly it was a 4-year gap, and then there was sort of a real arms race. And once that, it took roughly 15 years for an agreement to come for limitations on these things, during which time we were busy making an enormous number of weapons, which ultimately were a mistake, including, these enormous bombs that were unnecessary. And so things got out of hand. In our case, I think what you're saying is very important that we start now. And here's where I would start. I would start with a treaty that says we're not going to allow anyone who's a signatory of this treaty to have automatic weapon systems. And by automatic weapons, I don't mean automated. I mean ones that make the decision on their own. So an agreement that any use of AI of any kind in a conflict sense has to be owned and authorized by a human being who is authorized to make that decision. That would be a simple example. Another thing that you could do as part of that is say that you have a duty to inform when you're testing one of these systems in case it gets out of hand. Now, whether these treaties can be agreed to, I don't know. Remember that it was the horror of nuclear war that got people to the table, and it still took 15 years. I don't want us to go through an analogous bad incident involving an evil actor, North Korea, again, I'm just using them as bad examples, or even Russia today, we obviously don't trust. I don't want to run that experiment and have all that harm and then say, hey, we should have foreseen this.
Well, my sense is when we are better at technology, we're not in a hurry for a multilateral treaty, right? When we're under the impression that our nuclear scientists are better than remember, our Nazis are smarter than your Nazis kind of thing, that we don't want a multilateral treaty because we see advantage. And curious if you agree with this, we have better AI than anyone else. Does that get in the way of a treaty, or should we be doing this from a position of strength? And also, if there's a number two, and maybe you think we're not the number one, but assuming you think that the U.S. is number one in this, who is the number two? Who do you think poses the biggest threat? Is it their technology or their intentions or both? If you were to hear that one of these really awful things took place, who would you think most likely are the most likely actors behind it? Is it a rogue state? Is it a terrorist group? Is it a nation state?
First place, I think that the short-term threats are from rogue states and from terrorism. And because as we know, there's plenty of groups that seek harm against the elites in any country. Today, the competitive environment is very clear that the U.S., with our partner UK, I'll give you an example. This week, there were two libraries from China that were released, open source. One is a problem solver that's very powerful, and another one is a large language model that's equal, and in some cases exceeds the one from Meta, with which they use every day. It's called Llama 3, 400 billion. I was shocked when I read this because I had assumed that in my conversation with the Chinese, that they were 2 to 3 years late. It looks to me like it's within a year now. So it'd be fair to say it's the US and then China within a year's time. Everyone else is well behind. Now, I'm not suggesting that China will launch a rogue attack against an American city, but I am alleging that it's possible that a third party could steal from China because it's open source, or from the US if they're malevolent, and do that. So the threat escalation matrix goes up with every improvement. Now, today, the primary use of these tools is to sow misinformation, which is what you talked about. But remember that there's a transition to agents, and the agents do things. So it's a travel agent, or it's, whatever. And the agents speak English. You give them English, and they respond in English. So you can concatenate them. You can literally put agent 1 talks to agent 2, talks to agent 3, talks to agent 4. And there's a scheduler that makes them all work together. And so, for example, you could say to these agents, design me the most beautiful building in the world. Go ahead and file all the permits, negotiate the fees of the builders, and tell me how much it's going to cost, and tell my accountant that I need that amount of money. That's the command. So think about that. Think about the agency, the ability to put an integrated solution that today takes 100 people who are very talented, and you can do it by one command. So that acceleration of power could also be misused. I'll give you another example. You were talking earlier about the impact on social media. I saw a demonstration in England, in fact. The first command was build a profile of a woman who's 25, she has 2 kids, and she has the following strange beliefs. And the system wrote the code and created a fake persona that existed on that particular social media case. Then the next command was take that person and modify that person into every possible stereotype, every race, sex, so forth and so on, age, demographic thing, with similar views, and populate that. And 10,000 people popped up just like that. So if you wanted, for example, today, this is true today, if you wanted to create a community of 10,000 fake influencers to say, for example, that smoking doesn't cause cancer, which, as we know, is not true, you could do it. And one person with a PC can do this. Imagine when the AIs are far, far more powerful than they are today.
So one of the things that Dr. Kissinger was known for, and quite frankly, I appreciate, was this notion of realpolitik. Obviously, we have aspirations around the way the world should be, but as it relates to decision-making, we're also going to be very cognizant of the way the world is and make he's credited with a lot of very controversial / difficult decisions, depending on how you look at it. What I'm hearing you say all these roads lead to one place in my kind of quote unquote critical thinking or lack thereof brain. And that is, there's a lot of incentive to kiss and make up with China and partner around this stuff. That if China and the US came to an agreement around what they were going to do or not do, and bilaterally created a security force and agreed not to sponsor proxy agents against the West or each other, that we'd have a lot, that would be a lot of progress. That might be 50, 60, 80% of the whole shooting match, is if the two of us could say, we're going to figure out a way to trust each other on this issue, and we're going to fight the bad guys together on this stuff. Your thoughts?
So Dr. Kissinger, of course, was the world's expert in China. He opened up China, which is one of his greatest achievements. And but he was also a proud American. And he understood that China could go one way or the other. His view on China was that China, and he wrote a whole book on this, was that China wanted to be the middle kingdom as part of their history, where they'd sort of dominated all the other countries. But it's not like America. His view was they wanted to make sure the other countries would show fealty to China, and in other words, do what they wanted. And occasionally, if they didn't do something, China would then extract some payment, such as invading the country. That's roughly what Henry would say. So he was very much a realist about China as well. His view would be at odds today with Trump's view and the U.S. government's. The U.S. government is completely organized today around decoupling. That is literally separating. And his view, which I can report accurately because I went to China with him, was that we're never going to be great friends, but we have to learn how to coexist. And that means detailed discussions on every issue at great length to make sure that we don't alarm each other or frighten each other. His further concern was not that President Xi would wake up tomorrow and invade Taiwan, but that you would start with an accident and then there would be an escalatory ladder. And that because the emotions on both sides, you'd end up just like in World War I, which started with a shooting in Sarajevo, that ultimately people found in a few months that they were in a world war that they did not want and did not expect. And once you're in the war, you have to fight. So the concern with China would be roughly that we are codependent and we're not best friends. Being dependent is probably better than being completely independent, that is non-dependent, because it forces some level of understanding and communication.
好，大家可能会好奇，在中国的芯片和算力被卡脖子的情况下，但还是能搞事。中国近年来在大模型领域的快速发展令人瞩目，尤其是阿里发布的通义 Qwen 2.5 Turbo， 其性能在某些指标上甚至超过了 Meta 的 Llama。阿里的这次突破让美国科技界感到震惊，进一步缩小了中美之间的技术差距。中国的优势在于庞大的数据量，这为模型训练提供了得天独厚的条件。相比之下，美国和欧盟受到严格隐私法规的限制，中国的企业能更快积累和应用用户数据。此外，尽管中国在高端算力芯片如 NVIDIA 的100和 H100 方面受到限制，但华为和阿里等企业通过优化算法和自主研发芯片，依然取得了不错的成果。大家知道，人工智能核心要素数据、算力、模型，中国占了 2.5。所以，为什么美国要封锁中国的算力获取，特别是 NVIDIA 的高端 AI 芯片 H100、A100 等先进制成的芯片了？就是为了锁死中国在这个要求上突破美国的技术壁垒，达到或者超过美国的技术水平。说到算力 AI 芯片，美国的 NVIDIA 真的是行业标杆 ，A100、H100 这些芯片都是顶尖的。美国为了限制中国获取最先进的 AI 算力，对中国进行了技术封锁。所以大家知道为什么美国要这么做了吧？就是为了在算力源头上卡住中国。中国现在买不到这些高端芯片，靠自己研发，比如华为的升腾和阿里的平头哥芯片，虽然还追不上，但也在快速进步。但是在代工或者制造上还是差距非常大，因为芯片行业的全球分工可能还是台积电代工，这个是另外一个话题。所以英伟达、NVIDIA、台积电 TSM 的竞争力和不可或缺的技术能力是未来股价的有力保证。说回来，最神奇的是，即使被断芯，像阿里这样的企业还能靠优化算法和模型训练，造出通义和 DeepSeek 这样的大模型，不得不佩服中国企业的韧性。中国其实有全球最大的优质互联网用户，这些中国的用户基数大，数据积累快，这点是天然优势。特别是移动支付、短视频、 电商这些行业，海量数据直接让 AI 模型吃饱喝足。而美国和欧盟那边隐私法规比较严格，比如 GDPR 和 CCPA， 这种法律对模型训练是有约束的。但美国的大企业还是厉害，靠技术突破绕过了很多限制。除了算力和数据，在人才方面的差距呢？其实模型本质就是一个人的思维和框架抽象成的逻辑算法，不知道大家是否理解？简单举个例子，我们训练一个 AI 模型来识别猫，这个过程类似人类的学习、观察，输入很多猫的图片、数据，归纳总结。AI 通过算法学到猫的特征，耳朵尖、眼睛圆、毛茸茸，判断当给 AI 一张新图片时，模型判断这是不是猫。人的思维等于学习后记住猫的特点，模型逻辑等于将这些特点用算法，如卷积神经网络抽象成数学表达式。应用中的思维逻辑模拟，聊天模型，比如 ChatGPT， 把人类的语言习惯和逻辑用大规模语言模型模拟出来，通过概率和上下文判断对话的合理性。推荐系统，像 Netflix 或者抖音推荐内容，他们根据用户的行为模式，喜欢什么，看了多久，用模型抽象出这个人会喜欢哪些内容的逻辑。如果参考我之前讲的 AI 应用发展趋势，就是在编程领域的人类专家经验复制。在人才积累方面，美国确实是顶尖 AI 人才的聚集地，特别是顶级高校和实验室资源特别丰富，很多中国的 AI 学者也都跑去美国工作了。但中国最近开始重视本土人才培养，比如清华、北大的 AI 专业扩招，还有阿里、腾讯这样的企业在行业里扛旗，把更多 AI 人才留在了国内。就像这家初创公司深度求索 DeepSeek， 就是来自杭州的团队和成员完成。曾经中国 AI 被认为落后美国几年，但如今无论基础研究还是应用领域，中国都在迅速迎头赶上，甚至在部分领域已开始挑战美国。最后，中美 AI 的竞争就像赛车，咱们的数据和应用场景是优势，但基础研究还得追。总的来看，中国在特定的领域追赶策略的确是会让美国难受，这场科技战真的好戏连台，咱们就拭目以待吧。而 Eric Schmidt 说得很对，除了中美两国，其他国家在 AI 这块基本都跟不上了。未来的竞争就看谁能先在技术和产业化、人才培养上跑得更快了。